Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break. We have got another fantastic segment on our program, which is around the role of government in disaster risk reduction and disaster response. If you are a little bit lost in terms of the overall program, please do go and visit the overall program, which you'll find on the main screen of the app, and you would have also had it emailed to you in preparation for the conference. But let me introduce our three fantastic speakers. Our first speaker is Prof. Dewald van Niekerk. He is a professor of geography. I studied geography. It's wonderful to be in the presence of geographers. But he is the founder and head of the African Center for Disaster Studies at the Northwest University. And he's also the founder and editor-in-chief of the journal called JAMBA, which is the Journal of Disaster Risk Studies. So it's wonderful to have you, Prof. van Niekerk. Our second speaker is Dr. Mapaka Tau, and he's head of the Disaster Management Center. This must be a center where you don't get much risk, or you've got to be incredibly resilient. Because his job is to coordinate the implementation of disaster management and fire services for the country. So I would think that he has been a busy man. And the third speaker is Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, who I think is one of South Africa's household names. If ever there's a problem that we can't solve, we think, let me go to Gift of the Givers. They are the miracle workers. But Dr. Suleiman is the CEO and founder of Gift of the Givers. It's the largest disaster response NGO of African origin on the African continent. I think he puts the substance to the slogan, proudly South African. He's had 15 years heading up one of the most respected international humanitarian agencies. He's also a medical doctor. So I think we have a fantastic group of speakers to talk to us about the role of government in disaster reduction and disaster response. Let's kick off with you, Prof. Dewald van Niekerk. Over to you.
Great, Jeremy. Thank you very much. All the audience, people listening and watching, and I really appreciate the platform that you've given us, and also my fellow speakers, Dr. Tau and Dr. Suleiman. Enough said that I'm in the presence of greatness here today. So I've been asked to look at a disaster risk and the role of government within disaster risk reduction and disaster response from a more theoretical perspective, and then Dr. Tau will give us the input from government, and then Dr. Suleiman will look at it from a very practical side. So I hate PowerPoint. I don't believe in death by PowerPoint. So I'm going to ask you all to look at the polls for a second, and I hope you can see it there. I've published one poll, and the question there is, what is your take on the role of government thus far in the management of this COVID-19 pandemic, or disaster as we should call it? So go to the polls and just click your yes, no, or whether you're unsure, and let's see what comes up. So if you can do that quickly, because we can't waste too much time in this session. So far, it seems like 75%. Looks like my daughter's scorecard, report card, it's going up, so that's wonderful. Says that we've been doing a fairly good job so far. 17% are saying we're not doing a good job. So please keep on posting your responses to that poll, and we'll come visit that in a second. Now, why that is important is because the success of management, anything, is in the perception of the public, and that is what we've seen so many times in South Africa and globally, is that our politicians and our practitioners are chastised according to our perception of how well they've done, not particularly what they have done. And I think the very first keynote speaker, Professor Slim, also said that we sometimes get a totally different perception of what is happening because we're influenced by media. But be that as it may, when I've considered disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction, the role of government, the very first and foremost thing that I look at is what are these phenomena that we are dealing with. And one thing that I do feel strongly about, and you can once again go to the polls, I'm going to snare you a bit with polls today, is to gain your perception of disasters in general. Because if we perceive disasters to be this major event that we can't cope with, do we believe that they are natural and that they fall outside of our ambit in order to manage? So the question I'm asking, or I'm saying there's nothing like natural disasters. Do you agree or disagree with me? So quickly go to the poll and pop that up there. It says show on stage. I'm going to take a chance and click this button and see what happens. Ah, wonderful. I'm a bit tech savvy, but I've also messed up systems in the past. Ask my second year students. So there we go. So a lot of people say they agree that there's nothing like natural disasters, and a lot of people are disagreeing. Some people have absolutely no idea. That's also fine to have no idea. So the majority are, click that away, are looking towards they disagree that there's something like natural disasters. Now, our focus, when I say our, I'm referring to the broader academia. In the past, there's been a major drive towards bringing the message home that all disasters are human-made, that all disasters and the fallout from disasters are within the focus of us, and us meaning government, NGOs, civil society, etc., and that we have the ability to change the circumstances and the underlying factors which leads to disasters at the end of the day. Yes, given sometimes something does exceed our ability to cope. But theoretically, if we do everything that we are supposed to do, if we do all our disaster risk reduction, if we do our resilience building, etc., then within theory, we will not sit with disasters at the end of the day. We might have events that impact on us, but it won't exceed our ability to cope with it. Now, that's obviously in the ideal world. So I'm just going to leave that with you for a second and think about that a bit. There's a lot been written about it. There's a whole drive, if you Google it, under no natural disasters, if you want to read up on that. But I think it's important to also look at that part of the spectrum to kind of get your mind shifted in a different direction to say, but we can do. And the we can do part within South Africa falls mostly within government. Disaster risk reduction is mostly seen as something that government should be doing. So now, let me ask you this question, then I'm going to put it in the poll again. And that is, from which document do you believe should we or do we take the focus of disaster risk in South Africa? Would it be the Disaster Management Act, the Constitution, or in this case with the COVID-19, the Public Health Act? So if you can go to the poll and you can click there quickly, I'll put it on the screen so you can see. So most of the people currently are gravitating towards the Disaster Management Act. Rightfully so. I was very fortunate in being part of the development of that act, and then also the disaster management framework and a few others around Africa and so on. And for many years, over a decade, we tried to push the agenda of DRR. And I was absolutely amazed how quickly people got to learn about the Disaster Management Act in this pandemic, which is wonderful. And it's also frightening because now a lot of people can take you on and you just can't talk nonsense anymore, especially your students. And that's the part of it. But in actual fact, our responsibility for disaster risk management comes directly from our constitution, in the sense that we've got an obligation to safeguard our citizens, and we've got an obligation to ensure a safe and healthy environment. So although the Disaster Management Act, which Dr. Tau is responsible for, is an enabler towards that, it is ingrained in our constitution that our government is responsible to ensure that we are safe and that our environments are safe. And from that flows all of the other pieces of legislation. So sometimes we make the mistake to think that disaster management is just the responsibility of one sector or one department called the National Disaster Management Center. It is not. It's a much broader focus which government should be having. And the main focus of disaster risk reduction is obviously much broader than we most probably anticipate. So I'm just going to skip that poll because I think I've already covered that. I've given you the answer. So let's look at the next poll. If I say government has got this responsibility, then what is that responsibility? So click on that next poll for us. What should be the primary focus of government within disaster management? Is it the response to disasters, reducing the risk of disasters, or is it something abstract like sustainable development? Interesting, a lot of people going for reducing the risk of disasters. And that is so. Although we would say yes, disaster risk reduction relates to obviously exactly that, the major focus within government shouldn't be either of those two, the first two. It should be the last one, and that is sustainable development. And the reason for that being, and I'm going to tie that up with the focus on no natural disasters. If we implement sustainable development measures and we do that very successfully, all of the underlying elements that leads to disaster risk and inevitably disasters will be resolved. So the main focus of government should not only be responding to disasters or the reducing the risk thereof, but have a much more holistic picture. And I'm sure Dr. Suleiman is going to pick up on this because this is exactly what Gift to the Givers are also doing. It's not just a focus on people in peril, it's looking at the much broader focus of how do we ensure our sustainable development and what do we do with that. So let's translate this now into a bit more of a theoretical perspective. So for if we have to argue about on the role of government, there's basically three things that I can highlight. First of all, very important is government must provide some form of leadership. There must be engagement with civil society. Secondly, and thirdly, very importantly, is we're also responsible as a government for international cooperation. So within government, taking a leading role, this is where we see our statutory and regulatory issues coming out. This is where policies and acts like the Disaster Management Act is developed, policy like the National Disaster Management Framework is developed, and a multitude of cross-sectoral other laws which govern some element of disaster risk. I think you all would agree that our public health focus in this post-COVID, hopefully in a post-COVID environment, would very much look at COVID or similar pandemics as a major risk for South Africa. Yes, this is not the case, or was not the case on the 5th of March last year. So the whole focus of government has kind of shifted a bit to realize that it's not only one sector of government that should be looking at this, but this thing we call disaster risk cuts across sectors. It's multi-sectoral. Everyone must come to the party. The Disaster Management Act is very specific also in the devolution of powers to lower level of government, provinces, municipalities, and that they have a responsibility to do proper planning and first and foremost, do it within a developmental context. So we as the citizens of South Africa can be very critical and ask the question, why is this not happening? We've had the Disaster Management Act now for far over a decade, almost 2 decades. What are we doing? What are we doing in government in order to ensure that we are adhering to the role that we should be playing? And I believe we've already been very critical because we've experienced the COVID pandemic, but it goes much further than that. That being said, the second part of engaging civil society is equally important because all of society is affected if a risk realizes into a disaster. And interesting, our government, well, our Disaster Management Act also makes provision for this through the Disaster Management Advisory Forum, which should function at national level, province, and then local level as well. And that is supposed to bring together this multitude of role players, including civil society, the private sector, etc., to talk about these issues. And then lastly, the role in international cooperation. And this is where us as a government has got a role to play within the SADC region. We've got a role to play internationally in Africa and then also globally. And also, we know that disasters do not know boundaries. So therefore, transboundary cooperation is quite important. And that happens to a greater or lesser extent, depending on who you're dealing with in your neighboring country and their capacities, etc. So lastly, what I would like to put on the table is in terms of what should be the government's role in terms of disaster risk reduction. And that is a focus on recent research that I've been doing in terms of anticipatory governance. Beside being good governance also leads to anticipatory governance. And what does anticipatory governance mean? It means an all-of-system approach. It means that government needs to understand the complexity within systems. They must be able to foresee, obviously anticipate certain events happening, but implement an open-minded culture in order to manage what we are doing. In other words, not to have centralized, but to allow people to implement decentralized. And unfortunately, within our subnational level, this is what we've been seeing, a wait-and-see approach, where municipalities will wait for a province would wait for national. Whereas if you create the open-minded culture, people would feel more obliged to implement measures at disaster risk reduction. And that, at the end of the day, obviously links up with this very strong devolution of powers, which is guaranteed within our constitution. So in the long and short, that is my view. I didn't even watch the time, and I see Jeremy didn't appear, so I'm glad I didn't go over time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. van Niekerk. You were spot on with the time. You're right. I didn't have to make an appearance. Thank you for using the poll and getting our inputs, and really fascinating input. There's a theme that's picking up around, the whole of society, the systemic nature of COVID and the response that's required. I really like what you're saying, Prof, about the anticipatory governance approach, which almost has an inbuilt paradox in it, which is being proactive to react, not reactive to react. So trying to get into the space of sustainable development. So thank you so much for those fascinating frames and getting us going with how governments can respond to contexts like the one we find ourselves in. We're now going to move from the university, not that that's all you do, Prof, but we're going to go to Dr. Tao, who is heading up the National Disaster Management Center. Let's hear from you, Dr. Tao, what your thoughts and responses are to how government can respond. Over to you, sir. Dr. Tao, I think you're off mute. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you to the organizers of this session, and greetings to all the participants, and my sincere appreciation to the organizers of the session for assembling this important theme.
Dr. Tao, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm wondering if you can just go a little bit closer to your microphone, please. It's a little bit soft from our side.
Okay. How is it now?
It's still quite soft. Maybe you can just talk loudly, as if you're in a large hall full of people, okay. Like the old days.
Can I be heard now?
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm going to encourage people to put their volume up on their machines as well. If that's the loudest we can get you, Dr. Tao, we'll be able to respond. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much. My apologies for the faint sound. As it has been stated, I will be responding on the comments made regarding the need for clarity on the role of government in disaster risk management or disaster risk reduction. I'm picking also on the few points that Prof has made. 3 points being the inextricable link between disaster risk management and sustainable development, actually the mutual inclusiveness. Secondly, the multisectoral approach, as well as the anticipatory posture that we need to apply in dealing with disaster risk issues. So our presentation will cover these few areas. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the pictures show what we can end up with if we don't anticipate and if we don't mainstream disaster risk reduction in our service delivery and development programs, including on infrastructure delivery. We start off with just sharing the overview of disaster risk in South Africa. And we'll start off with a figure on the right-hand side, which shows what we want to classify as the worrying observations and trends on the increasing rate of disaster risk, where we start off by saying more people are at risk, and what are the drivers of that risk? It's natural hazards as a result of climate change and climate variability, which is obviously driven by our actions. But also on the right-hand side, pointing down, is our exposure to this hazard and the vulnerability that we create through poorly planned development. And as a result, we start to see unsustainable development trajectories and our vulnerable settlements. I think all of us gathered here in our different localities, we can attest to this challenge as we see mushrooming of settlements, some of which are developed at night in flood-prone areas, and with no action to make sure that people are resettled or relocated to safer areas. So this is therefore increasing the threat of disasters. As you can see, the narrative here states that South Africa is facing increasing levels of disaster risk, and the various hazards that the country faces are described there, and that climate change is driving this. And the report from the MDAT database and Q3 Risk and Development Annual Review, the radar, points to the fact that at this stage, South Africa is the 92nd out of 180 countries worldwide in terms of natural disaster risk, and it's experiencing total economic losses of $9 billion US dollars between 1952 and 2019. And this would have increased as things stand now. So this is showing that our increasing level of disaster risk needs to be attended to. The role of government, Prof has already touched on this, just to confirm that indeed disaster management, just like any government services, is a function that is implemented under the leadership of government across all spheres of government. And that constitutionally government has the primary responsibility, and that, and Prof highlighted this, disaster risk management requires a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach and must be dealt with on a continual basis, because the hazards and risks that are driven by both natural and anthropogenic factors continue to increase. On the right-hand side, we're just showing the framework for implementing disaster risk management that must always be implemented in a balanced manner through KPAs or key performance areas and enablers. And this is what informs the architecture of the function at national level, provincial level, and municipal level, including within sectors or sector departments and other disciplines, as well as the private sector. So now, the previous slide showed that the role of government, disaster management is clear. What should government do, supported by other role players? But then the question is, what more do we need? What we need is good governance of all government services, including disaster risk management. So what we simply need is good governance, and we will demonstrate how the South African government is putting this in place, and what will good governance therefore entail. In terms of the International Journal of Policy Administration and Institutions, it defines good governance as referring simply to performance and results. So make sure that your targets are achieved and make sure that you realize the intended results. This is linked to the definition by Andrews, Twitter, and Wilcombe in 2017 in their book, which is titled Building State Capability, who argues that a good governance system is the one that rids itself of the seduction of isomorphic mimicry. Isomorphic mimicry refers to a key technique of successful failure that perpetuates capability traps in development. And how you see it, successful failure refers to a manifestation of good appearance. Good appearance is to say, I've built so many 1,000 RDP houses without saying I've built them in areas that are safe. You find that from a publicity point of view, yes, we have built 1,000 RDP houses or normal bonded houses, but the issue is, did you factor in resilience in constructing them and increasing the location of those houses? So good appearance combined with real failure. So it's good appearance in terms of, yes, I've built, but the actual result is that soon or later we will come back to reconstruct those houses because they are built in an area that is not safe. So we can only achieve a desired public service and disaster risk management results if All our efforts are geared at positive change, that means development that is sustainable, as Prof has indicated, and are fitted to the users, and that is in the interest of our people. So our government is responding to this by adopting the district development model, which provides a framework for good governance and, of public services, working with all role players, stakeholders, and communities. This is what you need for all development discourses. And this is the framework that provides for fostering joint planning at district and metro level, eradicating duplication, misalignment, minimizing waste, and so on and so forth. And the premise of coming up with the district development model, which will also benefit disaster risk management, is the following negative areas as observed in our municipalities. All of our districts have untapped potential, levels of unemployment high, state special planning, governance, stability is generally fragile, national and provincial government programs are not implemented in a coordinated manner. We can read all this until we get to the last one. Climate change is threatening district development and no long-term planning. So those are important considerations that is then serve as a problem statement if we want to fix the system. And this also talks to aspects that need to be fixed in our district. Some of them including that there's lack of coherence in planning. I will not dwell into this because the previous slides have summarized them. They continue in this slide and the presentation will be shared. But then we are saying, in the context of those challenges that we have outlined as characterizing our localities, our districts, it means that the progression of vulnerability becomes the order of the day, where the root causes that are not addressed, dynamic pressures that are not dealt with, fragile livelihoods and safe locations such as lack of arable land, lack of biodiversity resources, physical resources. When this gets into contact with natural hazards, then you tend to have a disaster in that the situation becomes of a magnitude and severity that you cannot cope with using your own resources. So if we want to reverse this, later we'll show the progression of safety that need to be adopted as an approach. So here we are just sharing what the district development model will therefore address to ensure that we reverse the progression of vulnerability. The model will usher in a common vision for development of the country, broken down to the needs of opportunities of each district and metro geographic space. The 52 spaces. So I'll also not go into details on this in the interest of time. Why is the district development model needed? It's a continuation of the previous slide, and what will eventually become the game changer characteristics of the district development model. It also outlines these issues. All of them borders or center around sustainable development anchored on effective disaster risk reduction. The elements of the district development plans are also outlined here. You can see all these elements are characteristics of the development triple bottom line, economic, social, environmental issues with a stronger institutional basis. So are key elements of the district development model. Once we have implemented this, we will be reversing the progression of vulnerability in that we will address the root causes, we will reduce dynamic pressures, we will create safe locations and sustainable livelihoods, and when encountering hazards which are natural and cannot be stopped, our communities will not face harm as a result of those hazards, and therefore we will not find ourselves having to be in disaster declaration. And then in conclusion, we are saying government works over and in South Africa has a critical role to drive development and disaster risk management. This chiefly or primarily, the important focus would be to drive sustainable development, and by extension, that will also address the risk of hazard. Secondly, disaster risk reduction and management in South Africa. In South Africa and across its provinces is dependent on government providing conducive environment and the active role of all relevant role players. All of us seated in this meeting have got a choice to make as to where do I buy a stand, how do I construct my house, how do I ensure better or rigorous project cycle management wherever I'm living on projects that are being developed, whether infrastructural and otherwise. So we always have to ensure that the risk mitigation is a consideration. And we also emphasize the fact that the DDM has ushered in a paradigm shift in planning and service delivery discourses which enables all role players and stakeholders to drive the development agenda at local level. And COVID also have revealed the need to move away from management of disasters as events to managing underlying processes that create risk as part of multi-sectoral service delivery responsibilities within the context of DDM. So we should move away from managing disasters as events to managing underlying processes that create risk. These are daily decisions that we have to make in order to ensure that we build resilience in all the activities that we undertake. Finally, there is a need to emphasize and elaborate on the importance of the institutional location of the disaster risk management function. Within the organizational structures across the spheres of government, that is cross-cutting, that has convening power and is able to hold sector departments accountable for functions that need to be performed in terms of the disaster management legislation. So placing the disaster management function, the highest offices, just like here, our neighbor Eswatini, Lesotho, you go to China, you go to India, the disaster management function is placed in the highest office of the land, gives it the convening power, the authority, and the enforcement ability to ensure that disaster risk management is complied with. We really indeed conclude by saying disaster risk management is everybody's business, and I always prefer to quote Keith Smith in saying, I quote, as world populations increase and own material possessions, and as the built environment expands to accommodate those changes, more and more people get exposed to the forces of nature, and that economic development also leads to exposure of our people to anthropogenic hazards, close quote. This is just to illustrate the fact that as population increases, as the built environment responds, accommodating all our settlements that are increasing, more and more people are going to be exposed to the forces of nature. But it is not the national or provincial or municipal disaster management center alone that will be able to prevent, prepare for, and mitigate to avoid response. It is all of us who can ensure that we mitigate. Hence, Tom Lomlin said, it is not how you walk that matters, it is who walks with you and who you walk with. Close quote. Thank you very much, facilitator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tau. I love that slogan, disaster risk management is everyone's business. And thank you for sharing with us a governance model to respond to the increasing vulnerability that we are all faced with. And I also, it's a winter school, so we are learning all the time, but I'm fascinated by that reference to the building state capability, the isomorphic mimicry. That is my topic for the month. I'm going to go and explore it. Thank you so much for introducing that, Dr. Tau. We're coming to our third speaker on the segment of the program. Dr. Suleiman, you don't need introduction. You are known. So it gives me great pleasure, and it's indeed a great honor for us to have you on our program. Let's welcome Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, who's going to talk to us about his response from, I presume, gift of the giver's perspective on our topic of government responses to disasters. So if I can just ask the technical team, please, to pin Dr. Suleiman, and over to you, sir.
Good morning, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Professor Deval, for inviting me to the program. Good morning.
Oh, I'm gonna just sorry, Dr. Suleiman. We've got a similar audio challenge. I'm wondering if you can just talk as loud as you can. It's still very soft. Just try once more.
1 second.
Okay. We'll play a musical interlude, which we don't have. But Prof. Van Niekerk, you pinned on the screen, so maybe you're going to have to just sing us a song.
Can I?
Are you a singer?
I'm not even gonna go there, thanks, Jerry.
Well,
We've got 176 participants. I'll chase out half of them.
No. You'd be surprised. But we wouldn't classify it as a disaster. But Prof, while we've got you pinned on the screen, there's quite a few issues that are coming up in the Q&A. So let me ask you actually now just to give some of your high-level responses to what you're seeing in the Q&A while we get Dr. Suleiman better connected.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. There's one question that I actually found interesting in the previous session that I attended, and it came up here again. And it's by Russell Rensburg, and he asks, could the government have passed regulations to ensure a unified health system response to the pandemic? I'm not going to say yes or no on that one, but I'm going to speak about the broader perspective, which probably will give you an answer. Remember, when we go into a state of disaster, we adhere to the definition of a disaster, which means it exceeds our ability to cope using our own resources, on whichever level of government we are looking at. So therefore, there's acknowledgement that we need to implement extraordinary measures. Now, in the case where this is not present, the Disaster Management Act must be used. Now, okay, I'm going to answer your question. Yes, the government could have probably used regulations to ensure whatever you would call a unified health system. But the bigger question is, why didn't we have that before the time? We have to strive towards that way before disaster happens. So we can't use new legislation or legislation to sort out development issues. I've been quite vocal with what's happening in KZN with the perception that we can declare the looting and such as a state of disaster as well. We can't fix our development issues with the state of disaster, because then we can just as well declare national state of disaster indefinitely and try and manage the country like that. So a lot can be done, but we must also always ask the question, would regulations, immediate regulations, adequately provide for a response or a reduction of any possible risk that we have? So I hope I've answered your question there. Jeremy, should I go to the next one as well? I see Dr. Suleiman.
Yes, while we're waiting for the connection to Dr. Suleiman, what I suggest, Prof, is if you see any themes emerging from the different questions, maybe talk at that level. And I'll also ask Dr. Tao to be on standby, just to have a quick look in the Q&A in case we have a further delay with Dr. Suleiman. So let's go back to you, Prof. Van Niekerk, and see what you're picking up through the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. There's also a question around whether we've actually implemented anticipatory governance. And I must say, yes, I think we did in our response, for the simple reason that we were forced into looking at the bigger picture, and we were forced to think into the future, to do a bit of future thinking. So I think as a government, we did do that. And my experience with the pandemic was on the 5th of March, that day that we said we had our first case, I was asked to do a presentation on disaster risk management for pandemic at the NAT joints. And I was quite taken aback, because at that point, we didn't even talk about having a case in South Africa. And even there, you could see that people were already thinking, not in terms of prevention, but if this is of such a nature, and we've seen what happened in China, we honestly need to be thinking in longer term frames. So I think the government did do that, but there's a lot more to be done. It's not only a response. Anticipatory governance is in effect disaster risk reduction at the end of the day.
Prof, do you think that we have a national culture of harsh criticism, which stops us from being creative? I'm just thinking, you know, you're talking to a largely a government audience here. The one thing we're really good at is lamenting poor audit outcomes, and we lash everybody in government for that. And that tends to stop people from being creative and making a mistake. So the anticipatory governance by its nature, I think, allows us to test and learn. And yet often government officials are reticent to test and learn, because when you do that, you get punished if the test fails.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jerry. That goes 100% against what anticipatory governance is, and that is to allow for more open culture and to allow people to engage more with decisions on their level and be given the trust to be doing this. Now, there's the Germans has got a very interesting term. They call it Auftragtechnik, and that basically means that a commander in the army would give an intent of what they want to do, but the actual implementation are left open for lower levels to implement it. But there's trust between whoever gives the directive and the person that implements. And what you're saying is spot on. People are so afraid of this, I almost said God forbidden scorecard that every government official must strive towards, that they do exactly that. They lose sight of, I am a creative individual with immense qualifications that can change the environment. And if we don't change that mindset, it's a long road towards anticipatory governance.
Oh, yes. Well, you can see the emojis are flying. I'm going to bring Dr. Tao in on this, because I think this is also linked to, I might expose myself, but the isomorphic mimicry stuff. Is it? Or anticipatory governance and our kind of national culture of being afraid to fail. What are your thoughts on that? And I can see after I've come to you, Dr. Tao, I think we'll have Dr. Suleiman ready. Dr. Tao.
Thank you very much for that question. I think of importance is that always in governance discourses, we must always balance quality and quantity. We know that it might not be politically appealing to only focus on quality, because you might delay achieving a certain quantity that will actually profile your work. Achievement of sustainable development requires patience, requires that you follow the necessary rules. If we use an example of housing development or human settlement, you cannot achieve quality housing if you just decide to go to an area that is facing geophysical hazards, such as Merafong, for instance. That has got dolomitic sinkholes. You construct houses there, it will give you quantitative mileage, but it does not give you qualitative mileage in that still it will, the development will fail. So that anticipatory work must start with allowing disaster risk assessment for all forms of hazards, geophysical, epidemiological, hydrometeorological, in different areas to inform development decisions. It is against the backdrop that Parliament, in terms of Section 26 of the Municipal Systems Act, said disaster management plans must be integrated in the disaster management plans to be integrated in the IDPs of municipalities.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Tao. I really think that the shift from quantitative to qualitative is so relevant here, because quantitative is often short-term. Dr. Suleiman, when I introduced us on this platform, I said we will have technological challenges. And at some stage, some of us will fall out and some of us will fall in, and we will be compassionate and just embrace it as it comes. So you gave us that opportunity to exercise that. So I think you have now perhaps got your system improved. Let's hear from you, Dr. Suleiman.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit closer to your mouth.
Right there.
Okay, it's right there. I think we can hear you. We'll put our volume up. We so want to hear what you have to say. So, Dr. Suleiman, thank you for accommodating us, and please go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right, is it audible now? It's still too soft.
If we could perform a miracle, we'd make it louder, but I can hear you. I'm hoping other people have got the volume control on their computers up loud. I will follow instruction from the tech team if it's too soft, but I can hear you. So please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much once again. I'm going to try to speak as loud as I can. You know, it's on maximum on my side. So thank you very much for inviting me to the program. I need to say that I'm very frank, very critical, but still, you know, with the aim of getting the job done in terms of helping the public, helping the country. That's how we operate. In terms of disaster intervention, I've worked with Dr. Tao before and I work with disaster management. But the problem with government is, and I've said this many times openly, there's three things government needs to get into order. Three words government doesn't understand clearly: urgency, emergency, and disaster. And one of the major problems, there's too many different systems involved in government. There's too many different departments. There's no one centralized coordinating department do that. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. There's a fire in Khayelitsha. The guys that do an excellent job are the disaster teams that respond. The firefighters, the paramedics, the guys who come and clean the fire, they're absolutely brilliant. All over the country, our teams in terms of disaster and responding are absolutely brilliant. They do a phenomenal job. Their restriction is the fact that they don't have enough fire trucks, or if they go to an area, the fire hydrant is not working properly, or there's not enough water, or the management systems have not been checked, or the infrastructure rather has not been checked. So that puts a damper on those people who've come to put out the fire. So one of the major problems we have is there's, first of all, a lack of coordination between different departments, and I'll explain that just now. Secondly, the infrastructure is aged, and there's no follow-up, no maintenance. And Charlotte Makeke Hospital had a similar issue, where there was not enough water coming out from the hydrant, not enough water trucks to help in the city of Johannesburg, which is supposed to be the major city on the continent. There's not enough facilities for dealing with water with fire. I mean, there's a huge deficiency in terms of supervising infrastructure. By the same token, in the city of Johannesburg, not in some rural area deep in Africa, you have two hospitals that don't have water, Brahima Musa and Helen Joseph. How is it that the richest city on the continent cannot make provision for water for a hospital? And every day when you're asking for an answer, they'll say tomorrow, getting back to you, you know, we're sorting out the problem. And things that have been sorted out in 24 hours is taking weeks and not sorted out. There is no emergency plan to respond to create alternative sources of water for hospital. And that comes another problem. A lot of the people involved in responding to crisis are not disaster trained. They have no experience in disaster. They sit in offices, they prepare graphs, they don't go out, they have no experience. And for example, with Charlotte Makeke, when you tell them, why is a hospital that can hold 400 COVID-19 patients in the peak of a pandemic in Johannesburg closed, when the fire happened 2 months ago, affected one aspect of the building and not the entire building? They say it requires some kind of clearance. It requires a compliance certificate. Now, the request for the compliance certificate came only after the fire. If there was no fire, that hospital could be functioning like it normally did, with no problems. The request for the compliance, is it the same for that hospital as for all other hospitals? Because all other hospitals fit in the same boat. They ask for special type of fire doors. Do other hospitals have the same type of fire doors that this hospital has? No. So why is there an urgent need to put those things in? And you want a plan how to evacuate the patients from a hospital, when the doctors and nurses already evacuated the patients. There's living proof that they did it. What plan are you looking for? It's already done. You don't need something in writing. They've proved to you that classically, in less than 8 hours, the doctors, the nurses, the IC ambulances moved patients. Not only did they take them out of a disaster, they loaded them in the vehicles, brought in ICU ambulances, and even found places for them in other hospitals in the province. So what disaster plan are you looking for when they already did it? Somebody is not doing their homework properly. Coming back to Khayelitsha. So the fire trucks clears the area. The land is cleared, and now the people are waiting for food. The city council says it's not their responsibility. Disaster management says it's not their responsibility. Human settlement says it's not their responsibility. And local government says it's not their responsibility. And everybody says it's SASSA's responsibility. SASSA does not respond. It's more than 12 hours, people are hungry. Now it's cold, they've lost their homes, there's no water, there's no response from everyone, and 12 hours later, SASSA hasn't responded yet. Fortunately, we were there within 2 hours. At the moment the fire was settled, we started responding within 2 hours, providing food. SASSA came with food 3 days later, and the people were not impressed. They said the contracts were not in place. They were looking for service providers. They were arranging food from so many kilometers away. The service provider is not in that area. How come, when we have so many disasters in the country, we still don't have a response plan? We're supposed to have resources, cash money, rules that can override every other type of law and every other type of policy to make sure that we keep to three things: urgency, emergency, and disaster. We need to respond very, very fast. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy in government, the red tape, the egos, the so many departments involved does not allow for that to happen. That's one example that repeats itself over and over and over again, where the response for food and blankets is very slow, where most cases the government doesn't have that in stock also. There's no plan to have a fund ready to respond to that. In most cases that happens. Yes, in some cases, some blankets do come, and maybe one hot meal comes. But other than that, it's only for that moment. There is no planning for the next 3 to 5 days what's going to happen. We have no resources to do that, and it's outside support that backs up and supports the government in doing that. With the amount of disasters, we should have a disaster fund that makes money easy, available, and spent very rapidly. That does not happen. I'll give you a second example. Eastern Cape is sitting with drought since 2015. Many businesses have closed, many animals have died, many farmers have lost their farms, and as a result, thousands of farm workers have no income, and if they have no income, they can't go to the shopping centers in the smaller towns, in the rural areas, and all those shops collapsed, and all those people lost their jobs. What intervention was required? Water and fodder. Two very simple items. They could have saved thousands of jobs, thousands of animals, and thousands of businesses. But when you speak to people in government and you ask them, what is your response? They will tell you about how they're upgrading infrastructure of a dam. They will tell you how they're going to build a dam. And you want to know, are they out of touch with reality? Will this dam be built by this afternoon? Will the water be flowing tonight? And by tomorrow morning, will people have water in all those farms? It's an illogical response or irrational response that you get. You can't get water from the taps. There is no river. There is no dam. There is no rain. The only source of water right now are aquifers. And South Africa has endowed with many aquifers throughout the country where there's tons of underlying water. And nobody thinks about going to drill that water. And finally, when you advise them on drilling the water, they get caught in the tender processes. And to find something urgently will take them 3 months or 6 months before they can even get the water out. And also it depends on who you're calling, which type of company, how skilled they are. Do they know the geology, the type of rocks on the ground, the type of systems required, how deep you got to drill, or you just give the contracts to anyone. And you find municipalities advertising, they are so happy. They put up boreholes, 30 boreholes at a cost of 120 million. That's 4 million rand a borehole, which would actually cost 150,000 rand. And so many of them still not producing water. So what kind of systems does government have in place? I'll give you a third example. I mean, I can go on and on. There's just too many. Or let's take the third example, Sutherland. The sheep count over 4 years dropped from 440,000 to 31,000. How could that be saved? All they required was balls for the farms and fodder to save the animals. That would have saved the entire region, saved all the sheep, and would have saved many, many jobs. We came in, we drilled 233 balls at our cost to help the farmers. We put in millions of rands of fodder, and we're busy putting now nutritionally enriched pellets. So low-grade fodder is converted to nutritionally enriched pellets, which are benefiting the farmers and now starting to put the sheep count up. And as the sheep count is starting to climb, jobs are being created, more jobs are being taken back, more people are starting to have a living, and it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but the process is underway. And let me give you the last example. Just tons of examples. The Department of Trade and Industry, during COVID last year, requests the scientists in the country to develop a ventilator machine or an oxygen delivering device. They come up, they call the National Ventilator Group, the guys that build the SKA, the telescope, the scientific minds behind that, and they said, can you guys come up with something? So those guys get a proposal, about 90 proposals. They scale it down to 6 proposals. The proposals are done, a device is designed. A device designed by South African scientists and South African specialists for the South African public, for South African patients, for South African hospitals, for the South African government, because this was requested by the Department of Trade and Industry. The machines are made, CSIR develops them and produces them, SAPRA approves them, and Solidarity Fund funds them at 12,500 and each, 20,000 machines, 250 million rand. Now the drama starts. I get a call from the ventilator group and ask me, can you put these devices into hospitals? So I said, what do you mean? They said, we can't get them into South African government hospitals. And I said, how's that possible? Are you telling me that the device organized, designed, and developed by the South African government cannot be put in the South African government hospital? Am I understanding correctly? They said, yes, we cannot put this device. We are stopped by the Department of Health in getting these devices into the different hospitals. And they need to know where it's going. When the guys in the office have no skills, are not intensivists, are not people dealing with oxygen, not dealing with the patients on the ground, and every CEO and every hospital is calling for an oxygen delivery device. It's the second wave, and the patients are dropping dead in the hundreds, in the casualty, in the car park, in the cars themselves, in the homes, because we don't have oxygen delivery devices. Neither have we made arrangements to provide enough oxygen and enough oxygen points in the hospitals. You want to be proactive. You saw what happened in Europe and in America. Why did you not make plans for more oxygen points and more oxygen in the different hospitals? It was not done. And here you got a device that can save lives, and you can't deliver it to the hospitals. I said, give it to me. We took it and we delivered. We didn't wait for the health department. We didn't wait for anybody's permission. We took it and we delivered 2,500 devices to 6 provinces in 10 days. And we said, if anybody from the Department of Health got an issue, go and take the machine off the patient that has a CPAP machine, and the lives are being saved. We even spoke to Solidarity and said, look, to help the public, can we give these machines? We know it's free. We know it's a donation. We know it's taxpayers' money. Do you have a problem if I give it to the private hospitals? Every private hospital that sees a patient takes the pressure off a government hospital. Within 2 minutes, not 3 months of discussion, within 2 minutes, they said, do it. And we did it to all the hospitals, private hospitals in the country. There's my last point. Do you know what the feedback was from the CEOs and the doctors? Let's take Kala, the hospital right now that has no water. We got urgent calls, there's no water in the whole hospital, in the entire area. And our drilling teams are there and looking at what can be done. The Kala CEO said, every Monday morning, we sit and we count the dead from the weekend who have died from COVID-19 because of a lack of oxygen. This is the first time in the whole year that nobody died. Thank you very much for these machines. Gateway Hospital in Durban, in Umhlanga. The cardiologist calls, he cuts the call, he can't speak. He starts crying on the phone. He says, I can't speak, I'm sorry. He puts the phone down and somebody else calls. He said, you know how many people were dying? We had no oxygen machines. We have saved lives of hundreds of patients. Thank you very much for these machines. I can go on and on and on, but my time is up. I hope you could hear what I was saying. Thank you very much.
I'll start talking a little bit softly in case everybody's volume is right on high and I blast your ears. But let me say thank you so much, Dr. Suleiman, for your inspiring and provocative words. I think this really sets us up for some great debate, great discussion as to understanding what is it that sits between the well-intentioned regulatory framework and the inexplicable situations that Dr. Suleiman has articulated in his examples. We take away your 3 points, Dr. Suleiman: urgency, emergency, and disaster. Can our systems and can indeed our humanity respond appropriately in that way to the crises that we have found? Thank you for showing us ways around some of these challenges and showing that it can be done. Utterly inspiring. I'm going to ask that we keep an eye on the Q&A and that Prof. Fanika, Dr. Tau, and Dr. Suleiman just have a look at that Q&A and respond where you can to those questions. I'm unfortunately going to have to bring this session to a conclusion because of some of the pressures that my colleague who's going to take over from me has in terms of the program as stipulated and the time that we're now in. So I'm going to invite you to all thank our 3 speakers very much. I'm going to invite Nicoline just to show her summary graphically of this session. And I'm going to encourage you to keep going on the Q&A. Keep the themes that are emerging for you from the various speakers that we've got. Let's take these into the next discussions and also understand how we bring these into the debates. And if you're not inspired to join the public service after the input so far, please do so, and do so with a big heart, a creative mind, and a bold spirit. This is what we need so that we don't have a repeat of some of the situations that we've encountered so far. There you have the talent of Nicoline showing us a graphic summary of the 3 inputs from our speakers. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to the next facilitator, who is Judith February. I'm a fan of hers, so I'm signing off as your facilitator. She'll be signing on and taking you through the remaining sessions of today. So please enjoy the rest of the day. It's a fantastic program, and keep on thinking, keep on debating, keep on learning, and keep on committing to bringing your best forward for the great challenges that we face. Thank you very much. We'll go to the next segment now. Goodbye.